Hello and welcome to Energy Bridge Africa, the link to powering the continent with myself, Fifi Peters. In last week's episode, we took a deep dive into Africa's most industrialized nation, South Africa, examining the country's energy landscape and also the outlook. Today, we are exploring the role of public-private partnerships, PPPs as they are also known, in achieving energy security and growth, not only here in South Africa, but also in the rest of the continent. And joining me for more on this is Aluwani Moseisi, country chair at Shell Downstream South Africa, as well as Taelo Mojapelo, CEO of BP Southern Africa. To the both of you, welcome.
Thank you.
So we are essentially here to discuss partnerships. As you know, we have a new energy baby in town, the South African National Petroleum Company, and they're looking for partners. And I'd just like to understand from you, in terms of your general understanding and experience of successful partnerships when it does come with work with the private and the public sector, and what has worked in previous years. So if we had to talk about or break down the ingredients of successful PPPs, specifically in energy, what would they be? Aluwani, let me begin with you.
Oh, thank you. And it's a great question that you have. For me, maybe I'll ground it in terms of how we operate today, because we already operate in a model that is public-private partnerships, because then, you have, us as operators in the market, dependent on a number of SOEs that are invested in the logistics or in the infrastructure or network side of things. So for instance, you look at the relationship we have with Transnet and say TNPA, we lease the land from TNPA and we build tanks, and that's how we bring the product in country. And then we have a different partnership with Transnet Pipeline in moving the product from the coast and then moving it inland. And then you also then have a different partnership with Transnet on the rail side. And so again, it's a cycle that you're partnering at different levels. But for any partnership to work, essentially you then have to be able to can show or be able to demonstrate how the value is going to flow in the partnership, especially in the early days when you're establishing that partnership. You need to be able to say the business value, and you need to be able to demonstrate that there's going to be a return on investment, because ultimately that's what is going to drive that partnership.
Taelo, for you, in terms of what makes PPPs effective in the current economic landscape?
Yeah. So thank you, Fifi. And I think what's important to reflect on is the concept of purpose. So, with Africa being significantly energy deficient and the capital that's required to, invest in a robust energy system, and particularly for us in the liquid fuels sector, it actually does require that you've got a meeting of minds. And when you do have a meeting of minds, it makes it so much easier to work. And a practical example, I'm sitting here with the Shell country chair, and we've been in partnership since the 1950s or so, is it? And it has actually worked because there's been a common purpose, which is providing energy to a nation, right through, if you look at South Africa's transition from apartheid into the post-apartheid era and into the future as well. You've got to actually recognize that the primary purpose that you have is to provide energy, and in providing energy you require resources, and for those resources to materialize, you actually have to have a common purpose of what it is you're trying to deliver. Otherwise, if your purposes are not aligned, the partnership is never going to work.
Okay. So a common purpose, and for you, it's the rands and the cents need to make sense in terms of the value proposition at the end of the day. I started this conversation saying that the SNPC is in the market for partners. And I would like to put the both of you on the spot right now and just ask, just given what we have heard, just given the makeup and the formation of the SNPC, what it looks like right now, it's got the purpose also of trying to address the energy deficiency picture in South Africa, which both of you have been long-standing partners on as well. Is the SNPC an attractive partner?
Oh, what a tough question. No, but I think we have to look at where we are in the bigger scheme of things in terms of our energy sector at this point in time. What I believe is that there is enough space to have new players come in and play a different role. We all talk about the energy transition. But at the core of the energy transition, I believe that you have to be talking about a balanced energy transition, which says that you're still going to need oil, you're still going to need gas, and then you're going to transition into different types of sources of energy that you're going to need for the future. So, for instance, one of the roles that the SNPC, I think, definitely is going to play is in the upstream side of things, which is, you know, very early on exploration in South Africa, where we're not sure whether we have resources or not. And we hope there can be partnerships that can unlock that sector, and then we can get to a point where we are clear whether we have resources that we can be able to then develop and bring to the country. Because South Africa is highly reliant on imported products today. So if we can unlock the upstream side of things, that would be another area. And I believe in terms of legislation and the setup, the idea is that SNPC is probably going to take what we call the state carry in the upstream side of things. So definitely they're then going to be a partner that plays into that. And then you have the downstream side of things. Again, like I said, I mean, there is space for anyone who can find a proper business model that can be able to operate. So on the business model side, I would say SNPC has to kind of like define, you know, where do they want to play and how that business model is actually going to operate moving forward.
No, you are right. They are looking to do a lot more exploring just to shift our position from being a net importer of oil. And they're looking to speak to new partners and also old partners in which they used to partner in the upstreaming area of the market as well, in terms of trying to achieve their objectives. So the same question to you. In their current form right now, are they attractive?
Yeah, I wonder if the question is, are they attractive or not? Okay. It probably should be, is there a role that they can play? And I think definitely we know there is a role that they can play. If you look at examples of, you know, this kind of partnerships with state-owned companies throughout Africa, you look at Sonangol in Angola, that is an operating model that they have adopted and have adopted it very successfully, so both in the upstream and in the downstream sector. You go across to Mozambique, and I'm just talking in Southern Africa, you go across to Mozambique, state participation together with private sector and global companies, that has worked very well. So my view is, you know, SANPC is probably in pole position to actually define what it is that they want to achieve. And once they've defined it, finding partners is never going to be an issue. I mean, for example, right now, for us as BP, we are partnered already with SFF on the downstream side in Cape Town through the Cape Town terminal. So, and you know, we managed to partner with them because of a common purpose. They were able to define the purpose to us, and we actually thought this made sense. So it's not about whether they're attractive or not. It's about the value proposition that is then tabled. And I think, you know, now is a good opportunity for SANPC to, you know, get crisp and crystal clear about where they would like to play. And they are actually enabled as well by policy frameworks and the legislation. So, you know, I think they would do very well.
And I'm glad that you mentioned what is happening elsewhere in the continent, just making reference to the situation over in Angola and in Mozambique, where they also have their national oil companies that are trying to pursue the same or similar objective of energy security, and also, you know, have long-standing private partners there. And I'm just wondering if there are any lessons that you can draw from a model that they or these other countries have used that worked in galvanizing stronger partnerships that maybe a new player in the industry like the SANPC can draw from. Dailo, and I put that to you.
Yeah, I think the first thing that both parties need to have is an open mind, because as you can imagine, any state-owned entity would be concerned about issues around sovereignty and so forth, and a private partner would, you know, let's be honest about it, you're in it for profit, but at the same time, you want to make sure that you are actually changing the lives of people in the areas that you operate in. So, you know, if you take some of these lessons, I'll give you an example of, you know, in the aviation sector, where Sonangol has partnered successfully with private sector. And as a result, I mean, they run and own their airport infrastructure, working together with private sector. And that has actually ensured that they never actually ever run out of product, and they actually are growing their aviation sector as a result of that. So if I, you know, let me call it my counsel to SANPC would be, you know, you approach these things with an open mind. Things should be on commercial basis, but obviously you are guided by, you know, your legislation and policy frameworks to make sure that you actually deliver on your mandate, being, you know, as a state-owned entity, what is it that you want to achieve, but at the same time using partners, but recognizing that, you know, there are aspects where you can say something is charity, but in many instances, you need to make sure that it is actually it is financially viable in the long term, but also takes into account other aspects associated with ESG.
No, absolutely, and I think that the SNPC in and of themselves understand quite intimately the commercial aspect of this organization. You know, with the long-standing legacy issues of state-owned enterprises in South Africa that have not been profit-making, they do understand that profit is king and is key here. But in terms of my understanding of their partnership model, they are also of the view that majority of control should potentially lie with them. And I just want to know your views on that in terms of slicing the pie of the partnership with the private sector and just some of the elements that one has to take into account in terms of slicing that pie, be it a 60-40, a 30-70. I'm hoping that you catch my drift.
Wow, that's always a tough one, because I don't think it's you want to start by saying how much of a pie you're going to slice one way or the other. Again, it's about the value proposition. There are entities or partnerships that you enter into where you could be 10% and you can be content that I'm 10% in that venture, depending on what it is and what you're trying to deliver. Because then, but at the same time, there are others where at 10% you feel like, it doesn't really move the dial. It's almost like, I'm not really invested. I'm not actually moving anything, so to speak. And again, it'll go back to the point that Tyler raised earlier on. It's about really being open-minded about the different kinds of conversations. Because as soon as you just lock it in and you say it's 10% or it's 5 or it's 6, then you're locking yourself into a very, very difficult kind of situation. For instance, I can give you an example in terms of upstream, and you think about, how the proposed legislation tries to frame things to say, okay, you're going to have a 20% carry of the state, and you're going to have a 10% BEE, right? And then let's say then you are 70% if you're the major investor on the other side. The questions that you're going to be confronted with at a time when, if you discover oil or gas, the questions you're going to be confronted with is going to be, at what dollar rate are you going to be profitable in that ratio if you are carrying 20% or 30% or 40%. So each transaction will have its own unique features, so to speak, and so therefore you have to be rooted in doing what is practical, but also that has sustainability in terms of the business model. If the business model is wrong, it doesn't matter what is the number that you put behind it.
Okay. No doubt policy certainty and the regulatory framework are important in defining and encouraging any form of partnerships. And Dilo, you did allude to it a little earlier in your response, but I want to speak specifically about what is happening by way of policy and regulatory activities in our energy landscape right now, and whether the current legislations on the table are conducive for encouraging further partnerships as is envisioned by the state.
Yeah, I think my perspective on it is, and I think I hold the same view for many areas in South Africa. The policies are great, frameworks are there. We need to get very clear and robust about execution and implementation. Mm-hmm. Often when things fail, we often try to, throw the baby out with the bathwater, and you literally want to change the policy. Now, if you look, for example, in the liquid fuels space, there's a robust regulatory framework in place. It does actually work, and I think it works very well. We need to make sure that we continue to execute and make the tweaks as the macro environment changes. Mm. For example, right now, we were in an environment where, we probably about 80% of our product was through refining, and over the years that has dwindled, and South Africa is now largely a net importer. Mm. We need to just go back and say, does the framework itself, is it conducive enough for that import mechanism, be it with DMPR, with Treasury and so forth, and all the different stakeholders, as well as Department of Environment as well, and Department of Transport, just to make sure that we're covering all our bases in that respect. So I actually don't think there's an issue with our policies and frameworks. It's really just our ability to execute on those policies, but also at the same time making sure that we continuously review whether they remain relevant in light of the macro context.
Yourself, or do you share a similar view, or is yours slightly different?
I think I share a similar view, but I'll emphasize a little bit more in the moments when you need to be quick enough, and in the moments where you need to respond to the changes that you are faced with at a time. So for instance, I mean, we have a regulated fuel price in the country, right? And at times the regulatory framework, you kind of like adjust fuel price once a month, right? But your global prices are moving on a daily basis, essentially. There could be times where you find that, as, oil companies, actually, and this is something that sometimes people are not aware of, we're actually carrying the South African consumer for a number of months in billions in the rands, because then what you are actually paying at the pump and what you are paying for the product, there's a huge delta between the two. And so at times what you want is essentially, that quickness in the response in the policy framework that you then get. And that's really where most of the times that's where the challenges lie. It's not so much that we don't have the framework and we don't understand how the framework works. It's so much how quick can it respond to the change.
But I want to talk to you about this as just sticking to with policy frameworks and the regulatory landscape as well as governance, because right now, yes, we are talking about strengthening South Africa's energy position, but in the main, it is also about strengthening that of the continent. And when we talk about the legislation and the policy and the governance, I mean, do the same rules apply when you are looking at some of your partnerships that you do broker outside of the country in the rest of the continent?
So I think for us, the core, you start from you as a business, what do you stand for? What is your value system, and what guides how you then do business? And then the legal framework becomes something that, you work through, because even in the legal framework, you're not always going to have the black and white in certain areas that you work in. But then if you know exactly, what are the values that drive you, and you say, okay, we're going to stick to integrity, we're going to stick to transparency. So in any partnership that you're going to enter into, those will be the values that you will espouse. And anytime, we spend a lot of time doing, this nice thing called due diligence anytime you enter into a partnership, because you want to make sure, they're not going to be unpleasant surprises at a point in time. And even in that negotiation, you'll have to make sure that if there are any issues that you're concerned that tomorrow can be the issues of contention, you want to try and make sure that you are clear on, if we reach a stalemate on a governance issue, what is the route and the process that we're going to follow to be able to resolve that governance issue. And thank goodness, I mean, in the legal framework, you have that in the Companies Act, in the MOI, in the JV partnership agreements that you normally sign. You will make sure that you have such kind of clauses that then deals with how are we going to resolve the issues around governance and other issues.
All right. As we wrap up, Dalo, you mentioned the heydays when South Africa was in more control of what it paid and how much it paid for oil, because a lot of the stuff was coming from within our borders. And now you also made reference to the fact that, I mean, there's so much coming into the country, which is something that this government is trying to change and has mandated the SNPC to also change. I suppose it's a question on going down memory lane and throwing forward to the future as to, realistically, do you think we can get back to the past or even surpass it?
I'm probably going to say something a bit more controversial,
Okay.
Fifi. When we say we're more in control, I think what we've got to educate our viewers on is the fact that South Africa is not a market where, we actually are in control of the source of oil. And what do I mean by that? We do not have crude supplies. So under all circumstances, even when we had a refinery, we were dependent on crude imports. So if you didn't have the crude imports, or if there was a cut on crude imports, guess what? You still wouldn't have product, because you actually are dependent on your base product coming from elsewhere. What has changed today is the fact that it's no longer the crude, but the final product that's coming through. The situation would change if, for whatever reason, we then discover crude oil, somewhere within South Africa's, waters, or, on land, inland or something of that sort, then you're actually in a position where you can confidently say that you are more in control. Because ultimately, we've been sourcing crude from the Saudis largely, or from the US, but it has had to come from that source. Today, what's different is the fact that it's the product that's coming in. And what we have probably not prepared ourselves for is the change in source, because previously with crude coming in, we had what we called a single buoy mooring out in the waters, which could handle lots of product coming in. It goes into the pipelines, gets to the refineries, and it's in these very large tanks, and it's processed. Today, what we need is infrastructure that would make sure that we actually have the imports coming in, which is the finished product. And that finished product then requires the same level of scale of economies in order for it to be viable. If we have to build a refinery, and I don't want to speak for other people, but take an example. We know Dangote's refinery in Nigeria took close to 10 years to build. So we are faced today with the situation where we have some years where we need to build a resilient import pipeline in order for us to have a security of supply. And we also need to then get into the concept of strategic stocks. How much strategic stocks are we going to keep as a country? That's a dialogue we need to have. And if it's not a dialogue, it's a policy position that needs to be stated and possibly mandated, in terms of ensuring that you've got the security of supply. So I just thought I should just paint that picture, because often people look at it and they think, oh, we actually don't have product now, but you actually didn't have. What the difference was, you were bringing in crude, and the crude was being processed. Okay. And again, with those same fluctuations, some months you make money, some months you don't, because of all the crude price changes that take place.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. No, thanks for setting the record straight. But I mean, in referencing Dangote's refinery, I mean, one can argue that unlike Dangote, South Africa necessarily is not starting from scratch in setting up shop completely anew where one didn't exist. With us, we have got a few refineries that are laying dormant right now for a whole host of reasons. So it's the same, similar question to you, Aluwani, just in terms of a brighter energy future for the country and what it looks like and what that would entail.
Well, I mean, I think the brighter future is to look at it as a balanced transition moving forward, is to make the choices now that we know are going to serve us in 10 and 20 years to come. So if you decide that you're going to go on a path of LNG, for instance, or gas for the future, then it's something that you need to start to invest now, and then be able to know exactly how is that gas going to be used, who's going to offtake that gas, where are you going to invest in the infrastructure so that it meets that. And most significantly, I mean, I'll be clear. I mean, one of the advocates was saying we need to be at a space where we can be able to explore for the potential resources that South Africa has, whether it be oil or gas, and see, can we be able to extract those resources in a commercially viable way, so we can remove the dependence on imported crude and imported gas on the other hand. But then that, it's a long-term project that you have to think about, because even if you find the gas, you still have to think about, what are you going to do in terms of gas to power on the other side? Because it has to talk to who's the final user and the end user on the other side. And if we had to go back maybe on the refinery side and you look at the lessons of the past, some of the lessons of the past is that through regulation, we try to force refineries to make money beyond their operational capability, in a sense. And then ultimately, it was really the straw that broke the camel, in that, you saw the regulated price that said, this is how much is your gross refining margin. But then, the refinery operational costs were higher than that, and we didn't catch up on that. And the other side of it was really about, how can we make sure that future investments went into the refineries to modernize them, so that they either comply with Clean Fuels 2 and other specifications that we have in the market, and then be able to have a return on investment when you put in the capex on the other side. So lessons for the future would be, whatever new models we come up with, we need to make sure that they are financially sound and sustainable to can be able to carry the industry forward.
Like how you are ending as you began, in terms of the value proposition needing to make sense, and just also drawing on your emphasis on the purpose of the project also needing to be crystal clear. But to the both of you, thanks so much for the time. We have come towards the end of today's episode, but no doubt it has been a really interesting one, hearing from the private sector, specifically this time around in building energy security here in South Africa, as well as on the rest of the continent. I am bidding goodbye to Aliwane Mosiesi, country chair at Shell Downstream South Africa, as well as Ms. Dielo Mojapelo, CEO of BP Southern Africa. Thanks once again to yourselves as well for watching Energy Bridge Africa this week. Until next time, keep powering forward.